Look around you, and it won't be long until you find a mermaid. No matter where you are, how many miles from the sea. These endearing creatures seem like part of our collective consciousness. Some remember them from childhood tales. Some find comfort in powerful art and images. And some, even today, are convinced that they truly exist. But what is the history of these beloved beings? Was there ever any truth to them? And why are we still so fascinated, despite the millions of distractions in our modern world? I set out to the coast to discover the story of this most cherished creature of maritime myth. This is the story of the mermaid. Dating from the old Babylonian period, cylinder seals, like this one from the British Museum, show what is quite possibly the earliest known depictions of what we may recognise as merfolk. These ancient images may be in reference to some of the earliest creation myths known to exist. Stories that describe battles of forgotten gods against a cosmic backdrop of primeval chaos and unrest. Amongst these many deities were the Apkallu, often shown as fish-like hybrid gods, of whom one of them, Oannes, appeared from the deep ocean and taught mankind all manner of things, including writing, mathematics, and agriculture. On the face of it, stories like this, including the accompanying images of men cloaked in the skin of a fish, suggest something of the evolution of our race, our advancement into civilization and mastery over the earth, whilst remaining symbiotically connected to it. In fact, stories like this are common throughout early history, and another such story is thought by some to be the origin of the popular mermaid image we know today. This story, of which may be a continuation of other similar myths, concerns a goddess known as Atargatis or Dicerto, of whom drowned herself in a lake following the accidental death of her husband, a shepherd by the name of Hadad, with whom she had bore a daughter. When submerged into the lake, the goddess was transformed into a half-fish, half-woman hybrid, with surviving depictions of her strikingly similar to what we would recognise today. Sites dedicated to her cult would contain a pond with sacred fish of which could not be eaten, and her veneration saw this profoundly feminine goddess become a symbol of fertility, love, and the life of the waters. The ancient Greeks came to know Atargatis as Aphrodite Dicerto, and indeed it is here where the folklore of the mermaid begins to greatly expand. Nereids, sea nymphs of which represented everything that was beautiful about the sea, were described as the daughters of the old man of the sea, Nereus, of whom along with ocean goddess Doris, bore 50 of these nymphs, of whom would sing, dance, and be friendly unto the sailors, offering them help such as seen with the famous myth of the voyage of the Argo and the search for the Golden Fleece. Of course, the image of a beautiful sea goddess singing amongst the ocean waves may bring to our minds a very different kind of being, the often dangerous world of the siren. These creatures, of whose name may mean those who entangle or bind, first appeared in Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus is warned about the song of these beautiful sirens, of whom enchant and lure away the sailors with their song. a song of which Odysseus wishes to hear without falling prey to them, and is thus tied to the mast of his ship, where the ropes and bonds cut into his skin, for his temptation to follow them is so great, but he survives from being tied, bound, and grounded to the world he knows, the mast and the ship beneath him. In early versions of these tales, the siren is given no description as to its appearance, with Apollonius of Rhodes later describing them as being part bird and part woman, and by the 7th century BC, this is indeed how they were depicted, likely inspired by the Ba, a concept in ancient Egyptian religion for the subtle aspects of one's being, something similar to our personality, of which upon death travels out from the tomb, and is thus depicted as a man-headed bird. Later, however, the siren began to change form into the mermaid creature we see today, with sources as early as the 3rd century BC, describing sirens as Tritonesses, after the famous god of the sea, Triton. However, it is not until much later when the image changed in the wider collective consciousness, with one of the first examples of sirens shown as mermaids dating from the 8th century AD in Liber Monstrorum, a book of beasts and creatures, wherein they are described as being sea girls, with the body of a maiden, but with scaly fishes' tails. These early myths are hard to pin down. Their origins are shrouded in the secrecy of time, their true meanings difficult, if not impossible, to piece together. Such is the nature of allegory, metaphor, and myth. But these tales offer us a glimpse into the minds of our ancestors, of both the fear and veneration that the ocean brings with it, and also of the changing tides of humanity, as it moves from nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes to the new world of agriculture and permanent settlement, with the settlements where these stories were first told sprouting up around the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Our relationship with water, and the creatures of which may dwell within it, is as old as humanity itself. As with the Liber Monstrorum, the medieval period saw a further interest in mermaids and sea nymphs, with ancient images such as sirens now almost entirely shown as fish hybrids akin to mermaids, their attributes like their beauty and their haunting song being gradually absorbed into this new conglomerate image. They would show up in bestiaries and medieval art, some of which embroidered by hand, or painted into illuminated manuscripts, of which would appear to glow and dance with the flicker of candles. This art showing, as well as mermaids, other hybrid and fantastical creatures, allegedly dwelling in all four corners of the earth, and almost all of them being accompanied by some kind of moral or lesson, suggesting that this world was God's domain, and that each living thing had a purpose and a meaning, of which we must learn from as we further explore the uncharted regions of our earthly home. To see more of this, I visited the Mappa Mundi, the largest medieval map of the world in existence. This map shows a medieval view of the world, and is complete with the same kind of creatures as shown in the bestiaries, with both the real and the unreal living side by side. It dates from 1300, when Marco Polo published an encounter of his expeditions to Asia, the Book of the Marvels of the World. This map shows a world ruled by the Church, with Jerusalem and the crucifixion at the centre of the world, and it shows a view of the earth where myth and legend sit side by side with known trade routes and geographical features. There is also a mermaid, sitting here in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. In one of her hands, this medieval mermaid is holding a mirror, her other hand appearing to touch her fish's tail. This type of image, with the mermaid shown holding either a mirror or sometimes a comb as well, had become increasingly popular within this medieval world of bestiaries and moralistic lessons. According to some, this may simply be regarded as the mermaid being vain, and thus representing the sin of vanity. But could there be more to this? It was certainly a popular image all over the medieval world, and it did not take me long to find another example, this time at the Church of St. Lawrence in Ludlow, where wonderful misericords display all manner of scenes from medieval life, both religious and secular, sitting side by side. Here, a wonderfully carved mermaid misericord can be found, complete with comb and mirror, just like in the bestiaries and the Mappa Mundi. There is no doubt that these symbols were considered feminine, such as seen with these Roman gravestones, where a wealthy woman holds the mirror as a reflection of her status, and of Pope Boniface, of whom in the 7th century is recorded as saying that a comb and mirror were an acceptable gift for a Christian queen. The mirror could also symbolise the moon, like this Roman example found at Wroxeter near Shrewsbury, one of the finest surviving examples in the world. Herein lies another feminine symbol, this time concerned with self-reflection and intuition, as well as the cycles of a woman's life, reflected in the ceaseless changing of the tides, dictated by the moon. It is also of importance that the medieval chronicle writer was almost always male, and books such as bestiaries would be mostly read by monks and clerics, the moral tales inside usually reflecting this religious and overtly male influence. It is thus no surprise that the mermaid, already thought of as suspicious and able to lead the sailor astray, guiding his ship to its eventual doom on the rocks, would be conflated with a wider fear of the feminine, prevalent in the minds of the celibate monk, in a time when female spirituality could be easily relegated to witchcraft. The comb and mirror showed not only vanity, but a fear of the image the mermaid represented, be that her strangeness and otherness, the half-nature of her being, or her possibility to tempt and lead astray. Out at sea, mermaids were more than simple drawings and allegories. In the superstitious world of the sailor, the possibility of unknown and dangerous creatures lurking below was of no trivial matter. Many were convinced that such creatures were real, and famous names like Christopher Columbus write of encountering mermaids whilst at sea. In the case of Columbus, he wrote in 1492 that they were not as beautiful as they are painted, and in another case, from the famous pirate Blackbeard, or Edward Thatch, he ordered his crew to sail away from certain enchanted waters, claiming that he had seen mermaids there with his own eyes, and was fearful of upsetting them. The sailor's life was, of course, a dangerous one, with a constant stream of work and rest dictated by the ship's bell. 4 hours on deck in all weathers and conditions was followed by 4 hours below deck to rest, and so it would continue for years at a time, with no companions apart from your crew. And this crew would be, just like with the early bestiary writers, entirely male, with the only feminine influence being the personified sea itself, or sometimes the figurehead of the ship, of which could have even been formed as a mermaid herself, harkening back to the days of the Nereids offering protection to the sailor and guiding them on their long voyage. But life at sea was never easy, and it is not hard to imagine that amidst the frustration and difficulty of such a life, that the sailor may sometimes dream of such sea maidens, perhaps even seducing him and taking him away to some saltwater kingdom beneath the waves, in a phenomena similar to the succubus, a dream-born demon of whom may seduce the dreamer before draining the life force from him. This may have also been the case with the bestiary writers and religious moral makers. The celibate monk experiencing dreams wherein he is seduced by some supernatural being, only to find upon awakening that his seed or life force has been drained. In such cases, it is highly likely that the dream would be considered the visitation of a demon rather than merely part of life. This demon or nymph would steal into his mind and take away his illusion of a mind free from lust and sin. But unlike the monks, sailors would meet not just their crew all the time, but encounter people from all over the world. And this would be no more true than when the ship would find its way to port, and the sailor would stagger onto land and find his way to the pubs and inns of the nearby town. There he would meet other sailors from all corners of the maritime world, and it would not be uncommon for stories and beliefs to be swapped between men and absorbed into the rich folklore of the sailor. For instance, it would not be uncommon for a merchant sailor to encounter Mami Wata, or the Mother of the Water, an ocean deity venerated in Western and South Africa, and depicted as very similar to the mermaid. She may lure the sailor away for an illicit moment, before revealing her true nature to him. Acceptance of her may bring them wealth and riches, or even physical healing of his wounds, but rejection would bring the ruination of his family and home. This is rather similar to a famous Scottish folk tale, and this time it is actually written from the perspective of the woman left behind at home while her husband goes to sea. It's worth pausing here to remember the loneliness and uncertainty of such a situation, dwelling as you might have done in a small home like this one I visited at the Ceredigion Museum on the coast of Wales. Unlike today, there was no way of making contact with your absent loved one, of whom at any moment could be thousands of miles away, lashed by storms and the cruelty of the sea. Often, the sailor would leave behind what is known as a sailor's valentine, a shell or glass trinket, adorned with poems and images of ships, usually with the promise of a safe return, and the remembrance to forget me not while I am gone. In the Scottish folktale, a selkie, a type of merfolk of whom dresses themselves in the skin of a seal, a little bit like those early Babylonian fish gods, visits a lonely woman in her seaside home. He is in the guise of a man, and they fall in love before their hearts are broken when he reveals his true nature. His home is not on land at all, but far out at sea in Sewell Skerry, an island off the north coast of Scotland. The woman, however, has a child with the selkie, and he turns out to be a selkie too, of whom is taught the pleasures of sun and ocean by his merfolk father, of whom ties a gold chain around his son's neck. However, this binding of herself to the sea carries with it an inherent sadness. For one day she marries a man upon the land, and he goes out one morning and shoots 2 seals, a big male and a young male, the youngest of which, strangely enough, has a gold chain around its neck. This tale tells of the sadness of the sea, and of the pining of a love that cannot be, or disappears into some deep and unknown world, never to be seen again. It is a much-loved tale in Scotland even today, mostly in its form as a folk song, the Great Selkie of Soulskerry. This idea that merfolk may fall in love with those on land and pine to be with them is of course something we all associate with the mermaid today. This may be because when, in 1837, Hans Christian Andersen wrote his fairy tale The Little Mermaid, the image of the creature began to change once more. Here our mermaid falls in love when, upon swimming to the surface, she witnesses the birthday celebration of a prince on board a ship. This story also brings up another element of mermaid folklore, that the mermaid lacks the immortal soul of humans, and although their lifespans are much longer, they return to sea foam upon their deaths. In The Little Mermaid, of course, the protagonist pleads with a sea witch to be given access to the land in search of love, and it is hoped, obtain her soul. This was not Andersen's creation, however, as the idea is to be found in obscure manuscripts such as the works of alchemist Paracelsus, of whom wrote in 1566 that a mermaid lacks the soul of a man, and can only obtain one through marriage with a human. This folklore led to the writing of Undine by Friedrich de la Motte Fouqué, a similar story of which inspired Andersen. In it, mermaid Undine is sent to land by her family in hope she would win her soul by finding a human to marry, a task she accomplishes by her betrothal to Huldbrand, a knight of whom falls in love with her. The name Undine itself also came from Paracelsus, of whom described an undine as a type of water entity, and goes further into stating that the children of an undine and a human will result in a being with a soul, but still retaining some element of the sea about them, known as a watermark, and possibly showing as a cleft in their throat, of which must be submerged in water to stop them from dying. This is of course somewhat similar to widely popular literary themes of fishmen and deep ones, popularised by H.P. Lovecraft in stories such as The Shadow over Innsmouth. It is tempting to think of these folk stories as some whisper of long-lost memories, missing pages in the story of humankind. Just like with the Selkie and the Babylonian deities, of whom could shed their fish skin and walk upon the land, could not the mermaid searching for a soul represent some evolutionary notion, some step forward into the next phases of consciousness? In some ways, these stories seem to take us back to some odd primal communion between the lapping tide and the edge of the earth, where in some strange ancient past, those creatures of whom would one day be us crawled out of the sea and strode up onto the land. Whatever the truth, The Little Mermaid ushered in a renewed love of the imagery and poetry of the creatures, with their depictions once again shifting from fearsome sirens to mournful and beautiful personifications of the sea. For the booming industrial age, these images of lapping shores and beautiful sea maidens evoked an atmosphere a world away from the factories and mills of the ever-increasing industrial age. This was also the dawn of the seaside holiday, where the sea could act once more as a healer, the promise of sun and fresh air, almost rescuing the hordes of holidaymakers from the mining towns and factory mills. For sometimes the first time in their lives, travellers could explore the coast and encounter glimpses of shells and maritime life only a stone's throw from their hotels and the world of holiday. Beaches were utterly crammed with holidaymakers, and many of them must have pondered, even if only for a moment or two, about those old stories and legends of mermaids living somewhere out there in the depths of the ocean. For reasons like this, bringing images of this maritime world into your home saw a new interest, with shells and trinkets now displayed with pride all over the Victorian home. Potteries like Majolica and Minton capitalised on this, with mermaid designs being amongst some of the most popular ceramic wares for the 19th century home. In 1989, the Walt Disney Company released their animated feature adaptation of The Little Mermaid, and with it, our love for mermaids has only continued to grow stronger. They can be found seemingly everywhere, a far cry from their fearful origins, and yet somehow still managing to inspire within us a feeling of fascination. Mermaiding, a type of cosplay involving wearing or even swimming in a mermaid tail, has become increasingly popular. There are even professional mermaids, putting on realistic swimming productions for TV, photography, and simply audience enjoyment. There is even an International Mermaid Day, celebrated on March the 29th, where some may wish to don their own mermaid tail or just pause to think of our relationship with these beloved creatures from under the sea. There are even mermaid festivals held all over the world, where people dress up as their favourite mermaids and parade the streets in colourful spectacles, with all notions of immortal souls, siren songs and fearful others lost in a world of dance, colour and light, of the pure enjoyment of a symbol and image which transcends culture and language, as it probably always has. No matter where you go today, you are sure to find a mermaid. Here in Blackpool, this mermaid-like creature is amongst the first things a tourist would see after they approach the ocean from the town's main train station. And here, on a back street of Hereford, a piece of street art depicting a mermaid speaks of an old piece of local folklore. And this mermaid stands next to an old circle of stones, suggesting a mixture of ancient and modern, coming together and fascinating us throughout all of the ages. Perhaps then there really is just something in that sometimes sad, sometimes fearful story of mermaids, which just appeals to us as humans. Their transformative and alluring nature, calling us always back to our Mother Ocean, connecting us with the mysteries of the deep and the aeons of forgotten belief, custom, and change. After all, even today in our fast-paced world, unconnected from our natural home, it is quite clear that many feel close to and wish to see, believe in, and connect with these creatures. We will likely always love mermaids, and they will always speak to us through art, music, and film, reminding us to treat our oceans with the respect they deserve, and to connect with them and our natural world, almost as if they have surfaced momentarily like the Little Mermaid, and seen us there upon the shore looking out to sea. and they now fall in love with us in whatever way they can, and wish to communicate with us from their deep homes under the sea.
Mortlos yn gweithio'r cia wrth ei hunan. Clywed cri yn dod o'r creigiau dan yr heilwen. Cri